Wildfires are a very common occurrence. There have always been wildfires around the world, and even today on April 15, when I make this video, there are dozens of wildfires both in the United States and in Canada and in many other countries around the world. They are a natural occurrence. But the big wildfire in Fort McMurray in Canada in 2016 that started on May 1, and its consequences and its size were absolutely not natural and caused by the Petrocene age, by the way that we exploit this planet Earth. John Vaillant, an American-born Canadian journalist and writer, has written a marvelous book that I regard as one of the best non-fiction books that I have read in my lifetime, probably. I'm talking about the winner of the Bailey Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction of 2023, a book that is called Fire Weather, a true story from a harder world by John Vaillant. This is incredibly well researched, this is incredibly well written, a book where John Vaillant puts together all the pieces that are necessary to tell the story of the Fort McMurray fire that occurred, as I said, started on May 1, 2016, that led to the evacuation of 90,000 people, the inhabitants of the town of Fort McMurray, which is in the province of Alberta, a province as big as Texas in the United States, a province that actually has, as John Vaillant says, a lot of similarities with Texas, because both of these, the state and the province in Canada, have lived much, have gained their wealth from petrol, from oil. In Fort McMurray's case, it is the oil sands of Alberta, of northern Alberta, tar sands, where a lot of oil is in the sand, but you have to win the oil from the sand in a very problematic and very complicated chemical process, which leads to a lot of pollution, which leads to a lot of rubbish that you have to throw away, thousands and millions of tons. So in Fort McMurray on May 1, wildfire number 9 is announced. It is a fire that is profiting a lot from the conditions in which it is happening. Because on May 1, 2016, the temperature in Fort McMurray, in northern Alberta, in the boreal forest, is 33 degrees Celsius, which is a very unnatural temperature in the northern parts of Canada, which is comparable to the northern parts of Sweden or Norway or Finland, where I live, in the region where 33 degrees happen, but every 20, 30 years. But here they have a period of time when it's very hot, the wind is also fueling the fire, and the fire gets bigger and bigger. The German translation of John Vaillant's book Fire Weather is called Die Bestie, the beast. And this fire, it becomes actually a beast. And it's a character in John Vaillant's book, like a character that is looking for destruction, an enemy of the people, an enemy of nature that is looking for nothing else but to destroy and to gain more ground, to become bigger and bigger and destroy everything in its path. Imagine a house, maybe the house that you're living in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. Maybe your house with 150, 160 square meters burning down completely within 5 minutes. That happens to the communities, to the parts of Fort McMurray, when the fire finally comes to the inner town, to Beamont Hill and to other parts of the town that are evacuated, and people lose their homes, lose their histories, lose their biographies, lose their photographs and all the souvenirs and the things that remind them of the past, when those little children that have become adults grew up in these houses in Fort McMurray. Vaillant tells much more than just the story of the fire. He tells the story of the woods in Canada. 10%, did you know that 10% of the forests that we have on this planet are in Canada? And something that I didn't know, I learned in school actually that trees are the sort of the oxygen bank of the world, that we need trees and forests, the Amazon rainforest, the forests in Siberia and in Canada and in other parts of the world, because they produce oxygen. But we have come so far in the exploitation of our planet, in the Petrocene age, where petrol is everything, and the profit from petrol feeds our greed, that, well, let me read a paragraph from this book, from the many things that I learned from this book. Since roughly 2000, an inversion has begun. The world's great terrestrial carbon sinks. The Amazon rainforest and the circumboreal forest, along with many other less famous forest systems around the world, have become net carbon emitters. In other words, what used to be a reliable source of carbon storage is now generating more CO2 than it is sequestering. This grave reversal is one of the most pernicious developments of the Petrocene age. As forests heat up and die from disease, beetle infection, fire, logging, land clearing, and drought, they skew the CO2 balance even further. It is not that living, growing trees don't continue to absorb carbon. It is that they are no longer keeping pace with the emissions of their sick, dead, and burning neighbors. Vaillant describes the history of the oil sands. If you don't know anything or not much about the oil sands in Alberta, he describes very detailed and very meticulously well researched how oil is generated from the sands, how big the industry is, how the industry came to Canada, how they bring those huge trucks that are like 3 or 4 floors high and that are transported to Alberta in their single parts in order to build them together first there. How this is working, he describes the history of fires around the world and how they have developed, how this history has developed in the last 25-30 years. Also that fire weather, actually fire tornadoes, are an occurrence that we see more and more around the world. In 2003, an Australian journalist, I think, he was the first one who shot a video, and you see some part of that video now. He was the first human ever filming how fire created its own weather, its own tornado, a fire tornado. And this occurrence has happened more and more in recent years when fire gets so incredibly powerful with 90 feet or 30 meter high flames, like in Fort McMurray in Canada, that it creates its own weather by pyro-CBs, which are fire clouds. It hardly needs to be said that more CO2 leads to more heat retention, which leads to more fires, which leads to more pyro-CBs. We are right now witnessing the early stages of a self-perpetuating and self-amplifying feedback loop, accompanied by myriad cascade effects. In human terms, this has been a long time coming, but in geologic terms, it has taken place overnight, roughly 7 human generations or 2 lifespans. So limited are we by the brevity of our lives and lately by the kaleidoscope swirl of technological advancement, further amplified by a 24-hour news cycle, that it's hard to appreciate how far we've come and gone to such an extraordinarily short time. Humankind has managed actually to change the temperatures on the planet within a very short period of time after the Industrial Revolution started. And by using petrol and gas for energy, we have changed the climate of this planet faster than it has changed before in millions of years, just within 100 years. And that is what John Vaillant describes. And he describes also that we still have a chance because nature is incredible in regenerating and renewing itself. But we have to change our way of life. We have to give up the Petrocene age. And because otherwise, John Vaillant says in this book, fire weather might be the only weather that we are going to have in the future. Read this book. It's an amazing warning. It's an amazing analysis of what happened in Fort McMurray in 2016 and what conclusions we can draw not only for the northern parts of Canada but for the rest of the world. Thank you very much and bye-bye.